I thought my parents were protecting me. Until I found the email. It wasn't from a competitor. It wasn't from a jealous ex. It was from my mother. She had warned one of my biggest clients that my company was financially unstable. She told them I was emotionally distracted because of my relationship. And she suggested they delay signing the contract. That contract was worth 6 figures. And that wasn't even the worst part. 2 days earlier, my fiancé Daniel had almost called off our engagement, after a private conversation with my father. That's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a concern. It was a strategy. My own parents weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to control me. And by the time I figured it out, they had already started dismantling my life. After I found that email from my mother to my client, I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to know how far this went. 2 days earlier, Daniel had sat across from me at dinner, barely touching his food. "We need to slow down," he'd said. "Slow down?" I laughed nervously. "We're engaged." He avoided my eyes. "Your dad," he said some things. "About your company. About financial risk. He thinks you're hiding stress." I felt my stomach drop. "My father said that?" Daniel nodded. He showed me numbers. Claimed Carter Solutions wasn't stable. He said if I legally tied myself to you right now, I could be responsible if something collapsed. It didn't make sense. My company had just closed 2 strong quarters. Revenue was up. We had expansion plans in motion. So how did my father have numbers? That night, I checked our internal financial dashboard. Nothing was wrong. But when I pulled archived reports, older versions, I saw something disturbing. A spreadsheet had been exported 2 weeks earlier. By someone using administrative access. Access I never gave. I traced the login. It wasn't a hacker. It was an internal consultant. A consultant my mother had recommended 3 months ago to help with operational efficiency. My chest went cold. The next morning, I called the client my mother had emailed. At first, they hesitated. Then they forwarded me the full message thread. It wasn't just one warning. It was 3. In those emails, my mother claimed I was distracted by my engagement, suggested my leadership was emotionally unstable, implied there were upcoming liquidity issues, encouraged them to wait before committing. She had positioned herself as a concerned insider. She signed off with, "Just looking out for everyone involved." That contract stalled within 48 hours of her first message. 6 figures. Frozen. I drove to my parents' house that evening without calling. My mother greeted me with her usual warm smile. "Emily, you look tired, sweetheart." I walked past her. "Did you email Franklin Industries?" Her smile didn't break. "I might have spoken to them. I was protecting you. By telling them my company isn't stable." She sighed softly, like I was being dramatic. "You've been stressed. Planning a wedding. Expanding too quickly. Sometimes people need help making responsible decisions." I looked at my father. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, "You're talented. But talent without guidance can be dangerous." Guidance. That's what they called interference. That's what they called sabotage. Then my father said something that changed everything. "If Daniel marries into financial instability, it affects him too." We were protecting him. There it was. Not concern for me. Not belief in me. Control. They weren't worried about my company failing. They were worried about losing influence over it. If Daniel married me, if we merged assets, if I became fully independent, they would lose leverage. And they couldn't allow that. That night, Daniel called me. "My dad spoke to your father again," he said quietly. "He's advising we delay the wedding." I closed my eyes. How long have they been talking? About a month. A month. While I was planning a future, they were dismantling it. Strategically. Quietly. Deliberately. That's when the pattern became clear. The consultant. The exported reports. The client emails. The private conversations with Daniel. This wasn't emotional manipulation. This was operational. Calculated. And if they were willing to interfere this openly in my relationship, then my business was already at risk. I went back to the office that night and pulled every access log from the last quarter. If they wanted control, they were about to learn something. I built systems for a living. And I was about to audit my own parents. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my office with 3 months of access logs pulled up on my screen. The consultant my mother had introduced, Mark Delaney, had administrative clearance far beyond what I approved. He had exported financial reports, accessed upcoming expansion plans, downloaded investor summaries, forwarded internal projections to an external email. I traced the external address. It led back to a holding company. One I recognized. My father's. Not directly under his name, of course not. But through an LLC he'd created 2 years ago. That's when the pieces stopped looking emotional and started looking strategic. The next morning, I met Daniel at a cafe. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I showed him printed emails, access logs, corporate registration documents tying the consultant to my father's investment group. Daniel went quiet. This isn't just interference, he said. They're positioning themselves. For what? I asked. He hesitated. To take control if you stumble. That word hit harder than betrayal. Stumble. They weren't trying to destroy my company outright. They were weakening it. Freezing contracts. Shaking investor confidence. Planting doubt in Daniel. If revenue dipped enough. If my engagement collapsed. If I looked unstable. They could step in as saviors. Invest. Restructure. Acquire majority stake. Legally. Cleanly. And I would never see it coming. I pulled company filings that afternoon. 2 weeks ago, a proposal had been drafted, not finalized, but drafted, suggesting external capital injection for stabilization. It included projected ownership restructuring. My ownership would drop below 51%. Below control. The draft wasn't signed. But it existed. And it had been created on my company's server. Using the consultant's credentials. I confronted Mark first. Not my parents. Him. He cracked faster than I expected. I was told it was contingency planning, he said. Your father said you were overwhelmed. That you might not be thinking long-term. Contingency planning for what? For a liquidity event. Or acquisition. By who? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That evening, Daniel called again. They spoke to my parents, he said. They're suggesting we sign a prenuptial agreement that separates you from Carter Solutions completely. I laughed once. Cold. So I lose equity in my own company, and you stay financially protected? That's what they're advising. It was brilliant. If I refused the prenup, I looked reckless. If I agreed, I weakened my financial position. If Daniel walked away, I looked unstable. Every path benefited them. That was the moment I stopped seeing them as emotional manipulators. They were corporate predators. And I was the asset. Not the daughter. I drove to their house again that night. This time, I didn't yell. I placed printed documents on the table. The holding company. The draft restructuring. The exported reports. The consultant payments. My mother's smile faltered for the first time. My father leaned back in his chair. You're thinking emotionally, he said calmly. We're thinking long-term. You're expanding too aggressively. We're protecting the family's wealth. Family's wealth. Not my company. Not my work. Theirs. You are going to take majority control, I said. If necessary, he replied. Necessary. As if stripping me of ownership was reasonable. As if weakening my engagement was collateral strategy. As if I was just a variable in a spreadsheet. Then my mother said something that clarified everything. If Daniel marries you with full control of that company, you won't need us anymore. There it was. The truth. Not money alone. Relevance. Control. Dependency. They weren't afraid of failure. They were afraid of losing influence. When I left that house, something inside me changed. This wasn't just about saving a contract. Or saving my engagement. This was about survival. Because if I didn't act fast, within months, I would lose majority ownership of the company I built. And they would call it necessary. I thought I had caught them early. I was wrong. 3 days after confronting my parents, I received an email from the board. Emergency meeting. Mandatory attendance. That never happens unless something is burning. When I walked into the conference room, I knew immediately this wasn't routine. 2 board members avoided eye contact. The CFO looked pale. And sitting at the far end of the table was my father. Not as my parent. As an investor representative. My stomach dropped. The chairman cleared his throat. Emily, we've received concerns about liquidity exposure and leadership instability. Leadership instability. The exact phrase my mother used in those emails. A slide appeared on the screen. Revenue projections, modified. Cash flow, exaggerated risk. Expansion timeline, framed as reckless overreach. It was my data. But distorted. Carefully. Professionally. And presented as concern. My father spoke calmly. We're not questioning Emily's talent. But rapid expansion without structured oversight can put the company at risk. We're proposing a temporary executive advisor. Temporary. Executive. Advisor. Which translates to oversight control. My control. The proposal included appointment of external financial supervisor. Freeze on expansion projects. Temporary suspension of large contract authority. Review of ownership structure if performance dips. If passed, I would still be CEO. But powerless. I looked at the numbers on the screen. They were based on data pulled before 2 contracts closed. Data exported by Mark. They were presenting old information as current. And it was convincing. The board wasn't malicious. They were scared. That's how you win control. You manufacture fear. I fought back. I presented updated numbers. I exposed the consultant's ties. I showed evidence of interference. But something was already working against me. Doubt. They had been whispering for months. By the time I spoke, the narrative was planted. The vote wasn't unanimous. But it passed. Temporary oversight approved. Effective immediately. I walked out of that room still technically CEO. But stripped. My expansion plans were frozen. My contract authority limited. My board trust fractured. And worst of all, Daniel called that night. My parents think your company is collapsing, he said quietly. They're advising we postpone the wedding until things stabilize. Stabilize. That word again. My parents weren't attacking randomly. They were synchronizing pressure. Board. Clients. Daniel. Hit all 3 pillars. Make me look unstable everywhere. And then offer to fix it. 2 days later, it got worse. One of my largest clients formally paused their contract. Reason cited, leadership concerns. That was nearly 18% of quarterly revenue. The board panicked. My father offered emergency capital. In exchange for convertible equity. If accepted, it would automatically dilute my ownership below majority within a year. Clean. Legal. Strategic. For the first time since this began, I felt real fear. Not emotional betrayal. Financial danger. If revenue dipped any further, the board would accept his offer without me. And I wouldn't have the votes to stop it. I went home that night and stared at the ceiling until sunrise. I had thought exposing them would be enough. It wasn't. They weren't reacting emotionally. They were playing long-game corporate chess. And I was 3 moves behind. But here's what they didn't understand. They built influence through fear. I built systems through logic. If they were manipulating perception, then I needed to control information. Not argue. Not accuse. Prove. Systematically. Because the next vote wouldn't be about oversight. It would be about ownership. And if I didn't flip this narrative fast, I wouldn't just lose Daniel. I would lose Carter Solutions. Completely. I didn't confront my parents again. That would have been emotional. And emotion was exactly what they wanted the board to see. Instead, I did what I should have done weeks ago. I audited everything. Not just emails. Not just contracts. Everything. Every export. Every forwarded file. Every metadata stamp. Every timestamp. I hired an external forensic IT firm, quietly. Not recommended by family. Not connected to anyone on the board. Within 5 days, they found it. The consultant hadn't just exported reports. He had altered presentation formatting before sending them to the board. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Just subtle changes. Worst-case scenarios highlighted. Growth projections minimized. Debt ratios displayed without incoming revenue offsets. Expansion costs shown without secured contracts attached. Technically accurate. Strategically misleading. Then we found something worse. 3 major clients who had paused contracts had received nearly identical emails. Different wording. Same structure. Same talking points about leadership volatility. And every message originated from accounts linked to my parents' holding company. They weren't just influencing the board. They were shaping the market around me. Artificial instability. But here's where they slipped. One of those emails was sent 12 minutes before the board meeting agenda was officially circulated. Which meant they knew the meeting was happening before it was public. Which meant someone on the board was feeding them information. That realization changed the game. This wasn't just parental control. This was coordinated corporate manipulation. I didn't accuse anyone. I set a trap. I scheduled another emergency board update. This time, I controlled the deck. I presented improved revenue numbers, because 2 smaller contracts had quietly closed. I didn't mention the forensic audit. Not yet. Instead, I introduced a new proposal. Independent audit vote. If the board truly believed oversight was necessary, then full transparency should apply to everyone. Including investor representatives. Including affiliated holding companies. Including advisory consultants. The room shifted. My father remained calm. But his eyes changed. Just slightly. The vote passed. Not unanimously. But enough. Because now, if anyone blocked the audit, it would look suspicious. And within 48 hours, the forensic report was formally entered into review. The board saw document manipulation patterns. email trails to clients, timeline overlaps between investor pressure and contract pauses, financial restructuring drafts created before any official liquidity concern. The silence in that room was different from before. This wasn't fear. It was realization. One board member finally spoke. So the instability we were responding to was manufactured? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The report did. My father attempted damage control. This is a misunderstanding of contingency planning. But contingency planning doesn't involve emailing clients behind the CEO's back. Contingency planning doesn't require shaping perception before a vote. And contingency planning doesn't involve pre-drafting ownership dilution documents. The narrative cracked. Not fully, but enough. Then came the vote that mattered. Temporary oversight, reconsidered. It didn't get overturned immediately, but restrictions were reduced. Expansion freeze lifted partially. Contract authority restored above previous limits. And most importantly, the convertible equity offer was withdrawn from consideration. Publicly. Because now it looked predatory. That night, Daniel called again. But his tone was different. My parents were told about the audit, he said. They're distancing themselves. From what? I asked. From yours. For the first time since this started, pressure shifted away from me. But I wasn't celebrating. Because something was still unresolved. One board member had voted against the audit. And that same board member had pushed hardest for my father's capital injection. The leak was still inside the room. And as long as someone inside was feeding information outward, I wasn't safe. My parents underestimated one thing. They thought this was about control over me. It wasn't. It was about control over narrative. And now that I had shifted it, they weren't steering anymore. They were reacting. And when powerful people are forced to react, they make mistakes. I just needed one more. The audit shifted the board. But it didn't destroy my parents. It cornered them. And cornered people are dangerous. 3 days after the audit report circulated, I received a legal notice. Not from a competitor. Not from a client. From my parents' holding company. They were formally alleging breach of fiduciary duty. Against me. The accusation? That I had concealed liquidity risks from investor representatives and acted against shareholder interests by expanding aggressively. It was clean. Strategic. And devastating if it stuck. Because if the board believed I had violated fiduciary responsibility, they could remove me as CEO. Immediately. I sat in my office holding the document. For the first time in this war, they had gone nuclear. This wasn't whisper campaigns. This wasn't manipulation. This was legal escalation. And the timing was deliberate. The lawsuit hit 24 hours before our next quarterly performance review. The same review where updated revenue numbers would prove stability. They were trying to destabilize me publicly before I could stabilize myself financially. Then came the second blow. A financial publication released an article. Carter Solutions faces internal governance dispute. Anonymous sources cited leadership volatility and family investor conflict. Anonymous. But I knew exactly where it came from. Board leak. Again. Investors began calling. Not hostile. Concerned. Concern spreads faster than truth. And markets respond to perception, not facts. Daniel showed up at my apartment that night. This is getting ugly, he said. It was always ugly, I replied. No, he said quietly. This is different. They're willing to burn everything. And he was right. If they removed me as CEO, even temporarily, they could. Install interim leadership. Push emergency capital. Trigger equity dilution. Frame it as corporate stabilization. And it would all be technically legal. The board called an emergency session. Again. This time, the tone wasn't fear. It was exhaustion. They didn't want family warfare in public view. They wanted resolution. And resolution, in corporate settings, usually means removing the conflict. Me. One board member said it plainly. Emily, if stepping aside temporarily stabilizes perception, maybe it's the mature decision. Step aside. Voluntarily. That way they wouldn't have to vote me out. Clean. Professional. Final. For a moment, I considered it. Not because they were right, but because fighting meant more volatility, more headlines, more investor nerves, more client hesitation. My parents had calculated this perfectly. If I fought publicly, I looked unstable. If I stepped down, they won. Then something unexpected happened. The leak made a mistake. The financial article cited internal revenue figures. Not public ones. Not estimated ones. Internal dashboard numbers updated just 48 hours earlier. Which meant, the board leak wasn't guessing. They had direct access. And they had just exposed themselves. I requested a 5-minute recess during the meeting. Walked out. Called the forensic team. Within 2 hours, they confirmed it. One board member had accessed updated revenue reports at 11:42 p.m. The article draft timestamp? 12:18 a.m. Same night. Same numbers. When the meeting reconvened, I didn't defend myself. I projected timestamps on the screen. Access logs. Download activity. Metadata match. And then I said something very simple. The instability damaging this company isn't leadership expansion. It's internal information being weaponized. Silence. No emotion. Just data. The board member tried to deny it. But timestamps don't argue. The fiduciary lawsuit suddenly looked less like investor protection and more like retaliation. The room shifted again. Not toward me emotionally. Toward clarity. Because now the board had a bigger threat than aggressive expansion. They had compromised governance. And that terrifies investors more than volatility. The vote that followed wasn't about removing me. It was about suspending the board member pending investigation. It passed. Unanimous. Including the chairman who had previously supported oversight. My father's legal team withdrew the lawsuit within 72 hours. Quietly. No press release. No statement. Because discovery phase would have exposed everything. But here's the truth. I didn't feel victorious. I felt something else. Cold. Because my parents had just shown me they were willing to sue their own daughter, risk tanking the company, trigger public scandal, just to regain control. That wasn't strategic positioning anymore. That was desperation. And desperate people make reckless decisions. Which meant this wasn't over. Not yet. The first thing I did wasn't scream. It wasn't cry. It wasn't confront them. I went quiet. And when I go quiet, I plan. I copied everything. Every email. Every document. Every bank statement. Every transfer authorization with my forged signature. Then I called a lawyer. Not the family lawyer. Not someone my parents knew. Someone ruthless. I didn't tell him a story. I handed him proof. He looked at the documents. He leaned back in his chair. This isn't just manipulation, he said. This is fraud. That word changed everything. Fraud. Forgery. Coercion. Financial abuse. He explained it clearly. They transferred assets without informed consent. They interfered with my business contracts. They misrepresented my legal authority to partners. And Daniel? He wasn't just misled. He was deliberately targeted. My father had told him I was emotionally unstable. That I was making reckless investment decisions. That he was protecting the family assets from me. He positioned himself as the responsible one. Daniel believed him. Because the paperwork backed it up. Paperwork my parents controlled. The lawyer slid a folder toward me. We don't confront them emotionally, he said. We confront them legally. Step 1. Freeze further asset transfers. Step 2. Send notice of legal review to all business partners. Step 3. File a civil complaint. Not immediately. But enough to make them panic. For the first time since all this started, I felt steady. Not heartbroken. Focused. That night, I went to my parents' house. Not to beg. To inform. They were sitting at the dining table like always. Calm. Controlled. My father looked up first. Have you thought about what we discussed? He asked. Yes, I said. I placed a copy of the legal notice in front of him. He didn't react at first. Then his jaw tightened. My mother picked it up. Her hands trembled. You're suing us? She whispered. No, I said evenly. I'm correcting you. My father's tone changed immediately. Cold. You're being manipulated. No, I replied. You just lost control. Silence. For the first time in my life, he didn't have a counter. Because this wasn't a conversation. It was documentation. He tried one last tactic. If you do this, he said quietly, you destroy this family. I looked at him. You already did. And I walked out. The next morning, the bank accounts were frozen. The partnership board requested clarification. Daniel called me. Not angry. Confused. What is going on? He asked. And this time? I had receipts. The legal notice did exactly what my lawyer said it would do. It didn't explode. It cracked. Quietly. First, the bank requested clarification on the authorization signatures. Then the partnership board requested an emergency meeting. Then Daniel called again. This time, he wasn't confused. He was shaken. I saw the documents, he said. The signature, it doesn't match yours. It isn't mine, I replied. Silence. Then, your father told me you approved everything. Did he show you proof? Yes. That was the moment it hit him. He'd been shown edited scans. selective emails, conversations taken out of context. My father didn't just lie. He curated a version of me. Unstable, impulsive, financially reckless. Daniel had believed he was protecting the company. He didn't realize he was helping them isolate me. Within 48 hours, 3 things happened. The bank froze all disputed transfers pending investigation. The board suspended my father's temporary authority. Our accountant requested original document verification. And that's when my parents panicked. Not loudly. Strategically. My mother started calling extended family. The story spread fast. I was suing my own parents. I was ungrateful. I was destroying the family business. They weren't defending themselves legally. They were attacking socially. Smear campaign. But this time, I didn't react emotionally. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, including the voicemail my father left that night. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "If this goes public, everyone loses." That wasn't a warning. It was fear. Then came the real fracture. The forensic accountant confirmed. Multiple signatures were digitally altered. Authorization timestamps didn't match my login history. 2 transfers were executed from my father's office IP address. That detail changed everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was traceable. The board scheduled a formal review. Daniel asked to meet in person. We met in a conference room that used to feel like ours. He looked different. Not defensive. Exposed. "I thought they were protecting you," he said. "They said you were overwhelmed." "Did you ever ask me?" I replied. He didn't answer. Because he hadn't. He chose the calmer voice. The older authority. The confident narrative. He chose them. And now the evidence was undoing all of it. By the end of the week, the board revoked my father's access to company systems. The bank flagged the transfers as suspicious activity. Our legal team prepared a formal fraud complaint. That's when my father showed up at my apartment. Not calm. Not controlled. Angry. "You've embarrassed us," he said. "No," I corrected him. "You embarrassed yourself." He stepped closer. "You think you can win this?" I didn't raise my voice. I already did. Because here's what he finally understood. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about documentation. And documentation doesn't care about family hierarchy. It cares about proof. 2 days later, the board issued a statement. Pending investigation, my father was removed from all operational control. Publicly. And just like that, the man who controlled everything was answering questions instead of giving orders. Daniel sent one final message that night. "I'm sorry. I should have listened to you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed back. "You should have." No anger. No begging. No reconciliation. Just clarity. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting. I was in control. And my parents finally understood something they never had before. I wasn't the emotional one. I was the strategic one. The weeks after the board's decision felt unreal. Victoria and Richard were sidelined. Not publicly humiliated yet, but powerless. Every attempt to manipulate, every whisper, every calculated lie, neutralized. Carter Solutions stabilized. Contracts that had once slipped away returned. Investors regained confidence. Employees who had quietly doubted me looked at me differently. Not just as a CEO, but as someone who couldn't be manipulated. Daniel came back fully, not because I asked, but because he saw the truth. We rebuilt our partnership carefully, deliberately. No blind trust. No assumptions. Every plan, every decision, discussed and executed together. Alex found their own footing, free from parental control. They joined the company in a role that fit their talents, not the role my parents wanted to mold them into. For the first time, our family wasn't defined by fear or loyalty to manipulators. It was defined by choice. I spent time reviewing Carter Solutions systems, strengthening them, automating protections, making sure no one, parent, employee, or outside actor, could ever hold the company hostage again. Every loophole my parents exploited, closed. And me? I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Projects I had shelved out of caution now launched. Innovations I had feared to try became successes. My life, once dictated by whispers and manipulation, was finally my own. I sometimes think back to those nights, alone, panicked, unsure. The betrayal cut deep, yes. But it taught me something essential. Strength isn't just about fighting. It's about seeing the game, controlling the board, and never letting anyone play your pieces for you. By the time the dust settled, Victoria and Richard were gone from our lives. Not vengefully, not maliciously, just gone. Their power evaporated, their influence neutralized. They could watch from the sidelines, powerless, while I rebuilt everything they tried to steal. And as I sat in my office one evening, looking out over the city lights, Daniel at my side, Alex nearby, I realized something. I had lost a lot. But I had gained far more. Control. Freedom. Respect. And a life that no one, not even my own parents, could ever manipulate again. I wasn't just Emily anymore. I was the strategist. The survivor. The architect of my own destiny. And nothing, no betrayal, no lie, no manipulative hand, could touch me again. The board was mine. The company was mine. My life was mine. Everything else? Just history.